All right, so today we're diving into something I think we can all relate to. Uh, Disagreements. You know, those sometimes a little too passionate conversations we have in our relationships,
Yeah, those can be interesting.
to say the least. And you know those moments where you're thinking, wait, are we really disagreeing about this again?
Oh, yeah.
We're actually taking a deep dive today into a podcast episode all about this. It's called Navigating Disagreements: Healthy Conflict Resolution in Relationships.
Okay.
And I have to say, what really got me hooked right away from this episode was the idea that disagreements, they're not necessarily relationship red flags. They're actually totally normal.
Yeah, it's so easy to kind of like freak out when you're having a disagreement with your partner and
Uh-huh.
think like, "Oh no, is this it? Like, is this the beginning of the end?"
Yeah.
But um it's really not. It's just part of being in a relationship with another person.
It's like that saying, friction creates fire. A
Mm.
little friction can actually be a good thing. It's how we handle that friction. That's what really makes the difference.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people, myself included, sometimes go into relationships with this idea that like, if it's truly meant to be, then there won't be any disagreements or like, we'll just agree on everything,
Right.
which is totally unrealistic.
Yeah. So it's not really about avoiding disagreements completely, because let's face it, that's pretty much impossible.
Right.
But it's more about learning to disagree in a way that actually brings you closer instead of pushing you apart.
Yeah, and the podcast episode actually compared it to how muscles grow stronger when you're, doing resistance training.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah,
So disagreements are like little relationship workouts.
exactly. It's like you're putting in the work, you're challenging each other, but ultimately it's helping you grow stronger together.
I love that. So when we navigate these disagreements in a healthy way, what we're actually doing is building up resilience, understanding, even a deeper connection with our partner.
Yeah. And learning to communicate more effectively, which is like, you know, key for any relationship.
Totally. Okay, so that all sounds great in theory, but let's be real here. Easier said than done, right? Especially when you're in the heat of the moment and those emotions are running high.
For sure.
I mean, honestly, who hasn't gone into an argument with the I need to win this mentality at least once?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Right.
Yeah, it's like we can't help it. Like that competitive spirit kind of kicks in,
Yes.
even if it's about something totally ridiculous.
Oh, totally. But the podcast made a really interesting point about this. They were talking to a relationship therapist, and they said, when we get so caught up in trying to win an argument, we actually kind of lose sight of something way more important. Listening to and really understanding our partner's perspective. So true. Because if
Wow.
we're busy building our case like we're some kind of lawyer,
Yeah.
we're probably not really truly listening, are we?
It's almost like we're trying to win a chess match with someone,
Yeah.
but we're not even looking at the same board, you
Yeah.
know? Like you might win the argument, but is it really winning if you're not even talking about the same thing?
And what's the cost? It's like you're so busy trying to prove your point that you completely miss out on what the other person is actually saying and how they're feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, that's not exactly setting us up for success in the relationship, is it?
No, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's where the whole focus on solutions that the podcast talks about really resonated with me.
Oh, tell me more about that. Because it's one thing to say, like, oh, focus on solutions. But when you're in the middle of like a disagreement and you're feeling angry or hurt, finding that common ground, it can feel impossible.
Totally. It takes a lot of effort and honestly a lot of practice. And the podcast actually shares stories from some real couples who have figured out how to kind of work through their disagreements in a more constructive way.
I always love when they bring in those real life stories. What did these couples have to say?
Well, one couple talked about how they used to always get stuck in this like negative loop of arguing, like things would escalate so quickly and they would just keep going back and forth. And then they finally decided to try using a timeout system.
Wait, really? Like a timeout, like we used to get as kids?
I know it sounds kind of funny, but it's the same idea, right? Like when things start to get really heated, they needed a way to just like hit the pause button before they said something they would regret.
I can see that. So what did they do?
They came up with this phrase that they could use as a signal to each other that it was time to take a step back. And then once they both had a chance to cool down, they would come back together and try talking it through again.
That's actually a really good idea. It's like when you're working on a project or something and you're feeling stuck, sometimes you just need to like step away for a bit, clear your head,
Right, exactly.
and then you can come back with a fresh perspective. I like it. What about the other couples? What did they do?
Okay, so another couple had this strategy that I thought was really interesting. They basically started scheduling specific time to talk about difficult topics.
Wait, hold on. So they like put it on the calendar, like disagreement time, 7 p.m. on Tuesday.
Just laughing. It does sound a little formal when you say it like that, but it works for them.
I mean, I can kind of see how that might be helpful, though.
Yeah, they said by setting aside that dedicated time, they were able to come to the conversation with a lot more patience and a lot calmer energy, which makes sense
Totally.
because they knew they had that time set aside to actually talk about it. So it helped them avoid like those little passive-aggressive comments throughout the week.
It's like, okay, we can disagree, but let's table this for our designated disagreement time later this week.
Exactly. And they said it honestly took a lot of the pressure off their day-to-day.
Yeah, and it creates a space for more mindful communication. Okay, this is starting to make disagreements sound almost, dare I say, manageable.
That's the goal. And the podcast didn't stop there. They actually gave a whole toolkit of practical strategies for healthy conflict resolution. A lot of it does kind of tie back to what we've been talking about, the importance of taking a step back to regulate your emotions, creating space for open communication, finding those solutions together instead of trying to win the argument. But they broke it down into 5 really specific strategies.
5. All right, I'm ready. Hit me with number 1.
All right, so the first one seems pretty obvious, but it's often the first thing to go out the window when we're in a disagreement. Staying calm.
Staying calm. Okay, yeah, that sounds good in theory, but in reality, like when you're in the moment and feeling like you're about to launch into a whole thing about why your partner leaving their coffee cup next to the sink instead of in it is like a personal attack.
Right, it's like our brains kind of go into that fight or flight mode. Like we're programmed to either defend ourselves or run away.
That's true. Okay, so what do we do? What helps? Give me the secrets to staying calm in the heat of the moment.
Well, they talked about a few things that sound really basic, but they work. Taking those slow, deep breaths like you always hear about, or like counting to 10 in your head before you say anything.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's just mentally trying to reframe the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
Like instead of immediately going to that place of, ugh, here we go again, maybe trying to think, okay, what's really going on here? How can we actually work through this together?
So basically just like hitting the pause button on your reaction and choosing to respond in a more constructive way. I like it. What's next? What's the next strategy?
So the next one goes along with staying calm. It's active listening.
Active listening. I feel like I've heard that term a million times, but what does it really mean?
It means actually really listening, not just kind of nodding along while you're planning out your next amazing point in your head.
Oh, you mean like I do?
We all do it sometimes.
Yeah.
But with active listening, you're putting your own stuff aside for a minute and really focusing on what your partner is saying and also what they're feeling.
That's important too.
It's about asking those clarifying questions, really trying to understand their perspective even if you don't agree with it.
It makes such a difference though when you actually feel heard. It takes down that defensiveness. Like even if you don't agree on the issue at hand, you at least feel like you're on the same team.
Exactly. And that actually takes us to the next strategy that the podcast talked about, which is using those I statements.
The I statement. Another classic communication tip that we've probably all heard before, but maybe not all of us use that often.
It's one of those things that's really simple, but it could be so powerful if you use it. The key is to shift from language that's blaming or accusing to language that focuses on your own experience.
So instead of saying, you always leave the kitchen a disaster, it's more like,
I feel stressed when the kitchen's messy because it makes it hard for me to relax.
ooh, yeah, I like that.
You're not pointing fingers, you're not attacking the other person, you're just stating how their actions make you feel.
It's amazing how such a small shift in language can totally change the whole vibe of the conversation.
It really can.
Okay, so we've got staying calm, active listening, those I statements. What's next on our list?
This one's interesting. It's about finding common ground. So even when you're disagreeing, trying to find something that you can both agree on.
So like hitting the pause button on the argument for a second and saying, hold on, what are we actually both trying to accomplish here? What's important to both of us?
Exactly. It might be as simple as we both want to feel loved and respected in this relationship. Or maybe it's something like we both want what's best for our kids. But whatever it is, finding that shared goal can really help shift the focus from that me versus you to more of a we're in this together kind of mindset.
That's a good point. It's so easy to forget that you're on the same team when you're in the middle of it.
Right.
Okay, so that's 4. What's the last strategy in the toolkit?
The last one is all about knowing when to just take a break.
Ooh, that's a good one. The strategic retreat. Because sometimes you really do just need a little space to cool off before you say something you'll regret.
It's true, and there's no shame in that at all. The podcast actually said that taking a break can be a really powerful sign of self-awareness. It means you're prioritizing the health of the relationship instead of just trying to win the argument.
It's not about giving up or avoiding the issue. It's about giving yourself that space to come back to it when you're in a better headspace.
Exactly. So to recap, those 5 key strategies from the podcast are staying calm, actively listening, using those I statements, finding common ground, and knowing when to take a break. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that disagreements don't have to be a bad thing.
No, they don't.
They really can be opportunities to grow closer if you approach them in the right way.
It's like that saying, right? The obstacle is the way. It's not about avoiding those disagreements altogether. It's about learning how to move through them with understanding and grace.
Exactly.
This has been such a good conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking about all this.
Of course, it's been fun.
I feel like I've learned a lot. So to everyone listening out there, as you go about your day, maybe think about which one of these strategies you could try out in your own life.
Even just one small change can make a really big difference.
That's so true. Disagreements are going to happen. It's just part of being in a relationship. But it's how we choose to approach them that really matters.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been awesome. Thanks again. Until next time, everybody, keep those conversations flowing. Remember, disagreements don't have to be a disaster.